Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. I am really excited for today's video because I'm going to be kicking off a new series on my channel. And you may or may not know, I own a lot of eyeshadow palettes, and I thought it would be fun to do a chopping block series on my channel. Basically, like, no palette is like necessarily safe. There are certain palettes, like my Natasha Denona palettes, I likely won't part ways with, even if it's not a favorite. Same with my McGrath Mothership palettes, but I want to split it into separate parts and do a chopping block where today we're going to be talking all about my cool toned palettes. As we enter the winter months, I feel like it's the perfect time to reassess my cool tone eyeshadow palettes and see what I want to keep versus what I don't want to keep. I'll also do like a colorful palettes chopping block part 2 or part 3, whatever part. I'll do like a warm palette part 2 or 3, whatever. I'm gonna do a grungy section, then I'm gonna do like an indie / special palette section. Maybe we'll see palettes overlap and end up in multiple chopping block parts, if you will. But that's my plan. And I won't move on to part 2 until I've completely wrapped up part 1. So I have 34 palettes in my collection that I am deeming cool toned palettes. You may or may not agree with me. I'm hoping I'm not missing any. I thoroughly went through my entire palette collection, and over the course of however long it takes, I'm going to be swatching maybe like palettes I know I'm going to keep against palettes that I'm on the fence about and see if there's overlapping shades, if I really need all 34 of these cool tone palettes, or if there's things that we can chop. And then I will come and update you guys whenever I get through all 34 palettes. I'm going to try and no pan left behind majority of these and kind of see what I reach for, and see if while I'm no pan left behinding palettes, if there are things that I truly want to complete no pan left behind style, or if there are things that maybe I can declutter. So that is what the series is going to be about. Today I'm going to be sharing with you the 34 palettes that are currently on the chopping block. So if you're excited, stay tuned. If you'd like to see me tweak things to this series, let a girl know in the comments below. I love your guys' feedback, and I really want to make this something that is entertaining for you guys to watch as well, or helpful, whatever it might be. I'm thinking I will come back to when I come back, I'll hopefully be sharing swatches of each of the 34 palettes, but I don't know if that's going to be too long. So I don't know if we're going to have to split it up into multiple videos. I'm not sure, but today we're just sharing the 34 palettes that are on the chopping block. So if you're excited, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel, I hope you'll consider subscribing before moving on. I do project panning content, tons of palette themed content, or if you just like chit-chatting about makeup, I'd love if you consider subscribing. And other than that, let's get into the palettes on the chopping block. It is cold outside here in Minnesota, but my apartment was 74 degrees without air on or off. So I turned my air on, and I don't know if I'm actually tan. I feel like my face looks way too tan. I don't know if I'm just hot, or if I'm just actually my self tan is actually darker than I thought. I don't know. Also, in person, I am obsessed with my eyeshadow, but then I look in the viewfinder and I'm like, I feel like I look like that character on Drew Carey that always wore blue eyeshadow. You guys know what I'm talking about. If you're a 90s baby, you have to know what I'm talking about. Was her name Carrie? Or am I crazy? But I thought it very fitting that I wear blue / cool tones for this video. I am gonna do an end of the year palette declutter. So some of these maybe hopefully I can get through and kind of make a decision on before the end of the year. But this series will obviously carry into 2024. Like I said, you guys might agree or disagree with some of my palette choices, but these are the palettes I deemed as cool tone. So I have 3 palettes from Tarte. This one is the one that I feel is gonna be that's not cool tone. So this is Colourpop Going Coconuts, which I know is more neutral, but I don't have a ton of strictly neutral palettes, so I'm not gonna do a neutral palette chopping block. And I feel for me, I'm wanting to compare this with Colourpop That's Taupe and see if I want both of these. I also actually have another Colourpop palette, but it's a 30 pan, so we're gonna get to that. So I just felt it most fitting to include here. So I have Colourpop Going Coconuts, that's on the chopping block. I also have Colourpop That's Taupe. This has historically not been a favorite palette of mine, but I do really like the shimmers. So I'm wondering with some of my Colourpop palettes if I am like majority over them, but maybe I'll save a couple of shades. I have a Colourpop palette that I reserved for like Colourpop singles, so I could always depot some of the shades in here, like if there's shades I really like. For example, I do really like Snake Eyes, Slated, and even like Cold Blooded and Constrictor. So we'll see what I decide, we'll see. But this one is also on the chopping block. I also have Colourpop Making Mauves, which looks like this. I'm very excited to reach into this palette this season. It's just when I like to reach for these types of tones. So I have that one. And then I will grab the last Colourpop palette I have. I have the Stone Cold Box palette. This is what I just like never feel super excited to reach for. But then I look at this and I'm like, oh yeah, this totally makes sense to keep it in the collection just for like 30 cool tone shades that I can like mix and match with other palettes if I need. But we'll see. We shall see if this ends up staying. All right, then I have my Tartelette in Bloom palette. I feel like this is a cool tone palette. I love this palette. I've repurchased it because I missed it. So obviously this one won't be going anywhere. But again, wanted to include every palette in my collection that I feel like is cool toned. We can get into my Natasha Denona's next. So we have the Retro Glam palette. For the most part, I feel like my shades are accurate, but I have been doing like a custom Natasha midi palettes. So if this does not look exactly like yours does, that is why. I'm like looking at this and I'm like, actually, I feel like there's quite a few shades in here that are not from the original. Recently, I picked up the Natasha Denona Xenon palette. You guys, when this first released, I was like, there's not a chance I'm buying that. And I feel like I bought this strictly for the shimmers because I feel like they're going to be so beautiful. But like in terms of grays, I don't love a gray. So I'm going to keep this no matter what. I just kind of wanted to add to my collection. It is really beautiful. I just will be curious to see how much actual use I get with that palette. Next, I have the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette. And this is another one that I feel like is more like nude. There's cools as well as warms. When I have reached for this palette, I've definitely created more cool leaning looks. So that's why I wanted to include it with this grouping of palettes. And like I said, some palettes maybe we'll see in multiple installments of this series, but there is the I Need a Nude. And then I also have the Natasha Denona, the Glam palette, as well as the Natasha Denona Lila palette. All right, I have 4 of my Pat McGrath Mothership palettes. I really struggled because I feel like Pat McGrath Motherships have like a mix of cools as well as warm tones. But first up, this one is definitely a cool toned palette. I believe, is this the Subliminal? Sublime, I never know. I think Subliminal. Really beautiful palette. Then I have this one, which is the Mothership 10. Moonlit Seduction. This is just something I'm really wanting to reach for like this holiday season. This is kind of giving me like New Year's vibes, specifically with the like more special shades. And even like this brown shade right here is relatively cool. So there's my explanation for why I feel like it's a cool tone palette. Then I have the Divine Rose palette. Again, there's definitely some warmer tones in here as well, some warm shades as well as cool, but I feel like this is more cool leaning, and I don't feel inspired to reach for this palette all that frequently, and if I'm going to reach for it, I feel like it's going to be in the winter months. And then finally I have this one right here. I'm not sure, I still even have my plastic on this one. Okay, I'm gonna rip that off. I think this is number 3, but I have no idea what the name of this one is. And I do not reach for this palette that often, so I'm excited to know Pan left behind this. I likely will not get rid of any of my Motherships just because I feel like I'm collecting them slowly at this point in time, but those are my Pat McGrath palettes. And actually, speaking of, I do have this quad as well. This is Interstellar Icon. This quad is so beautiful. I love this quad. Okay, moving on to a couple more smaller palettes. I have the Aether Beauty Ambertine Mini Crystal palette. This really beautiful purpley palette. I do really like this quad, but I feel like it's one of those that I'm like, do I really need it? Like, I'm curious how similar this would be to Colourpop Making Mauves. Like, maybe I can just keep one. You know what I'm saying? I also have the Lawless, the Glam One eyeshadow palette. This one just feels more cool leaning to me. So that's why I'm including it in this grouping. Then I have the Huda Beauty Wild Jaguar 9-pan palette. I really enjoy this palette. I think it's absolutely beautiful, but I have not reached for this in a long time. So definitely want to get some more use out of this, and I'm excited to create some looks with this one. This is a new addition to my collection. I haven't gotten around to testing this yet. It is from Mockingjay Beauty, and this is what this palette looks like. Kind of reminds me of another palette a little bit of the LH Cosmetics Daybreak palette. I'm gonna hold the two. Yeah, actually these remind me a lot of one another. I have not tried this formula. This is the first palette the brand has created. So I'm excited to see what their formula is all about. And then also I have my LH Cosmetics Daybreak palette right here. I have the Melt Mary Jane palette, which we all know this, I always say this is such a frustrating palette to work with, but I truly just have not been able to get myself to part ways with this because I always love the way that my looks turn out, even though it's extremely frustrating to get there. Okay, the Urban Decay Stone Vibes palette. I didn't really know how to group this one, but I feel like the times that I've reached for this palette the most in its lifetime with me is usually around the holiday time. So I figured I would include it in this grouping of shadows. I have really loved this palette in the past, so I'll be really curious. It's been a bit since I've reached for this one. I'll be curious to see what I think of this now, just because I feel like my preferences have changed so much this year, both in makeup as well as, well, eyeshadow is makeup, but like just in all realms, because I feel like I'm so much more into indie shadows these days. Like I do not, for the most part, I just like do not care about eyeshadow palettes that are available at like Ulta and Sephora. I just want like all the indie palettes. So I'll be curious about that Urban Decay palette. I also have this one from NARS. This was their holiday palette last year. This is the Stargaze palette, and this is what this one looks like. There's definitely some warmer shades in here as well, but it's a holiday palette. I felt like it was the perfect time to pull that one. I have the Charlotte Tilbury Exaggerize Quad, which actually I'm like, this is definitely more warm toned probably, or neutral, but I'm gonna keep it in this grouping. And then I have the NARS Suede 6-pan palette, the Voyeur eyeshadow palette in suede. This is what this looks like. I love this little mini 6-pan palette. I purchased this to travel with me last year, and this has come traveling with me ever since I purchased it, so I know I enjoy that one. We also know 1111 from Rowan is going absolutely nowhere. I have repurchased this palette as well, but it is definitely more cool leaning, so wanted to include that. Sigma Enchanted. I will be so curious to see how I feel about this. This is one I could potentially see getting chopped. I really enjoy some of the shimmers in here. Is it the best shimmer quality like of life? Definitely not, but I do not really like Sigma's matte formula, especially these deeper shades. I just think are patchy and like not the best. So I think what I'll end up doing with this palette really is, I'm curious if I could like depot some of the, like, I really like the shade Cosmos, Metamorphosis, Plume, Pudding, and I always love to have like a, like I would hate for an eye base setting shade to go to waste. I'm like, maybe I would end up depotting some of these shades. I would also be curious to swatch some of these like Cosmos and Metamorphosis against similar shades in my collection, and like, do I really need both? I don't know. We're gonna find out. I also have the Huda Beauty Rose Quartz palette. I absolutely adore this palette. This is definitely not getting the chop, but it is definitely more cool tone, and I'm so excited to play around with that one again. I also have the Oden's Eye Flora Story palette. Such a fun, pretty palette. I have not even finished testing this to completion, and I really need to. So I have this one. I will also share looks that I create when I come back to like let you know what I am chopping versus not chopping. I'll also share some of the looks that I created. I've been having so much fun actually just using one palette or like 2 palettes at a time to create looks and then taking pictures. So anyway, next up I have the Lunar Beauty Eternal Eclipse palette. This is such a beautiful palette, and it has not gotten the love that it deserves. I feel like when I first got this palette, I was using it all the time, and now I like haven't reached for it. And I have been loving blues this year, so I do need to get around to playing with that one more. This one is new, definitely not going anywhere, but it is a cool toned palette for the most part. It is the Nomad Cosmetics Ghost Town palette. It's such a beautiful palette. And I'm very excited to just give myself an excuse to reach for that one more. The Christmas Eve palette from Oden's Eye. Again, there's some sprinklings of like a few warm tone shades, but overall this is more cool leaning, and I absolutely love this palette. So very excited to play with that. I also am including the Oden's Eye Norns palette. This is kind of, it's more cool leaning, I would say. It's definitely more cool leaning. I really enjoy this palette. There's definitely like shades that I love and then shades that I probably don't necessarily need. So we'll see. We'll see what happens when I know Pan left behind that. I will be kind of interested just because like my favorite shades, like I really like Hallucination, Self, Charming. Oh my gosh, Charming's such a beautiful blue. I also like Optimism and Pink Chameleon. The mattes in this, as well as like some of the like satins, I don't really need. Amber Place and Green Chameleon Island. This is another one that I'm like, maybe I will try to depot this, although I did try and depot my Oden's Eye Solman palette, like the first one, and the magnets were like not, or the pans were like not magnets, which is just so annoying. So I actually, and it was hard to depot. So I don't know, we'll see what happens with this one. I'm honestly not sure. I could see this one potentially getting the boot just because this one is older in my collection. But like I said, I do really like some of these shades, and I feel like these are like unique to my collection. So I at least will want to keep those in some capacity. And then the 34th and final palette is this one from Alien Cosmetics, which is now Unearthly Cosmetics. This is the Not Normal palette. I don't foresee myself decluttering this palette just because I love the packaging. Like this is something I would like, even if I'm not using, like I would want to keep this just to display this. I think it's so cute. This is like some of my favorite eyeshadow packaging that I own. But this is what the inside of the palette looks like. Kind of a more like cool tone grungy palette. I have been using this a bit lately, but mostly just for basic on the lids, Gemini as an inner corner, or Emotions as an inner corner. So I'm actually really excited to know Pan left behind this one too. The mattes were not my absolute favorite, so we'll see if I can get them to work, or maybe I just need to like actually call it on this palette and like just have this as a display piece. But those are the 34 eyeshadow palettes that we're kicking off this chopping block series with. This is the Cool Tone installment, and I'm so excited about this. I think it'll take a couple of months for me to get through all of these palettes and to come back and share my opinions and what I am going to end up decluttering. Again, I do have an end of the year declutter that I will do, eyeshadow palette declutter, so I might end up decluttering some of these at the end of the year. Hopefully, fingers crossed, maybe I would have my update for this first installment of the chopping block by the end of the year. I just am not sure. It depends, because I have so many other eyeshadow palettes that I still am testing, and to like actually know Pan left behind these, like it's gonna take time. But anyway, that is gonna wrap it up for today's video. Thank you guys so much for sticking around to watch and for supporting me and my channel, as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.